ahead and hear.
Yeah, I mean, hi everyone, I'm Anna. I'm a senior neuroscience major and public health minor, and I'm a part of the 10 team.
Hi, I'm Abby. I'm an environmental science major and computer science, and I'm a sophomore technology major. And we're part of the Experimental team.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen the posters blasted all over campus, 10 times is a national competition that we're in right now. We made it to the finalists. So basically what we're proposing is to bring green roofs to New Orleans. Has a lot of benefits for the city, obviously, and kind of overall benefits for health and environment wise. So we're doing a pitch on Tuesday.
Yeah, to get the big money. Again, we're the 5 finalists. And the competition will get us some big money when we do this pitch on Tuesday. And the whole point of the competition was to come up with a clean tooling solution to like help with our rising temperatures. So we put roofs, gardens on the roofs. And here, this is also like a side, we're doing like a People's Choice competition for like People's Choice, so we can get extra money. You'll scan the QR code. I have like paper I can pass out, so I can easily scan it. But that'll help us get extra money, and it also takes you to like a 2-minute video about what we're about.
So we really appreciate if you guys voted for it.
Please take a picture and share. Be helpful.
You can vote with your computer and your phone.
I'll start passing it around.
Yeah, can you just, how do you vote?
You just
Scan
scan
the
the
QR
QR code, it's gonna come up, and we made a video, just kind of describing what our project is and the benefits of it. And then, it's just gonna have a little thing right next to the video that says like, submit your vote, and you just click it.
And why do we vote?
If you vote, then we get an extra $10,000 grant, to do the project, and we're partnered with Recirculating Farms, which I'm pretty sure if you guys are in the EMBER program that most of you guys would be familiar with them. But it's partnering with them, and so we're trying to bring like urban farming and green roof farming. And so with the extra $10,000, we can start implementing roofs in New Orleans. And we already have a couple of project sites that we want to do. And so since we're a finalist, we automatically got a grant. And so this would just give us more money to do that. And then we're competing to get the largest grant, which is $100,000.
Please share.
Yeah. And then Tuesday.
And come to watch the pitch party, and we'll have like food. We're gonna get like Jimmy John's and other snacks. We'll be nice and supportive of our community.
I'm Jackie Mutter. I'm one of the presidents for Environmental Action along with Ellie Redmond. And we're really excited because this semester we are doing Compost NOW campus. And we're working with Compost NOW. And this has been a goal of ours for a really long time. So we're really excited that it's finally happening. But basically our drop-off days are Wednesdays from 4:30 to 6. And we're by the Monroe Library by the garden beds. So if you bring your compostable goods like fruit and veggie scraps, coffee grounds, paper filters, eggshells, and then maybe baked goods, we'll get back to you guys on that. If you put them in either a paper bag or a reusable Tupperware container and freeze it and then drop it off, we'll take it for you and compost it. And if you're interested in volunteering with the drop-offs, you can contact me or Ellie too. And yeah.
I've already gotten asked this question. If we have a reusable compost we use at home and we bring it, is there something there we can just dump it into? Or do you have to leave whatever you bring it in?
No, I think you can just dump it.
You know, so y'all will have a bin there. Okay.
Yes. Any other questions?
Are you composting the stuff from like the OR?
No, I don't believe as of now we're doing that. That's something that we've discussed a little bit. But this is also open to non-students too, so people outside in the community, if you want to bring, like, spread the word and tell your neighbors to bring their compost and stuff, you can do that too. I have one of those little bins, so, but I should freeze it first before I bring it.
Yeah, like as you're, I don't know, as the week's going on and you have stuff that you wanna compost, you can just stick it in like the little reusable thing and stick it in the freezer. And then when it's Wednesday, you can bring it to us.
Thanks. Oh, that's good. Okay, hi, everyone, welcome. I'm, yes. You can't hear me?
To stop share and share this. We're still stuck on the last one. There you go.
Okay. That should work.
Yep.
All right, I'm Dr. Berger. I'm a physics professor in the environment program, and along with Jim Schott, we organized the Roundtable series. So if you haven't been to one of our talks before, we do about a monthly meeting where we invite two people from the New Orleans community to talk about a topic. We've talked about investing in green investing, and we've talked about offshore wind in the last year. We talked about the saltwater wedge. And so the idea is to talk about a topic that exposes you guys to maybe career opportunities or volunteer opportunities, things that you can do outside the classroom, you know, or in your summer breaks or after graduating that might, you know, be important for you to learn about. So if you have ideas for future events, you could let us know. This is really, you know, something that we want to do that is for you and about what you are interested in. So today's talk is mostly about composting, but also about entrepreneurship. And so I'm so excited. We're going to hear some of the like nitty gritty about what it takes to start a nonprofit, start a business and run it and make it successful and make it grow in the future. So let me introduce our first speaker is Lynne Serpe. Serpe. She's the founder and director of Compost NOW. NOW stands for New Orleans Waste. And it's modeled after a similar program she started as part of her Greening Libraries initiative in Queens, New York. Lynne was the first sustainability coordinator of the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival in 2020 through 2022 before joining the French Quarter Festival. She's going to tell us all about her career in sustainability and being a sustainability coordinator and running her business. So take it away, Lynne. Thank you so much.
So for the folks at home, I'm going to use this. I don't know if I need to do anything other than pivot. Anyone know?
I think it's already set up for you, so you can clip it to yourself.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. So Compost NOW does stand for New Orleans Waste, but it's also a call to action, Compost NOW. So I tried to have an acronym that kind of did double duty. I also built in sustainability into the name, which meant that if we expanded beyond New Orleans, it could actually be Compost Neighborhood Organic Waste. So we really tried to think about the name. We actually held a contest for people to supply different name options. It was at an event we held years ago back in 2017, which is when we started. So briefly, Compost NOW is a network of free residential food waste drop-off programs. It is geared towards residents. If you're a business, if you're a commercial entity, there are various compost vendors that you can hire to haul away your food scraps. So the program was for residents who didn't have any other option. The food waste is then taken away and it's composted, or it's used to feed farm animals, because food ideally is used to feed people, then feed farm animals, then perhaps maybe captured and used for methane. That's kind of debatable depending where you stand on it. Then composting, then the landfill. And so that's really the EPA actually has an entire kind of food waste hierarchy. So composting is great, it's a step above the landfill, but ideally we can feed people and feed animals. So we try to at least feed animals in it because people are bringing us their scraps. So for us, there's a little sign, a line here, it says from garbage to garden. Sometimes we say from trash to treasure. What we want to do is have people think differently about their waste, but also empower people to take collective action over their food waste in a city that doesn't have any sort of municipal program for us. So how it all started, I have this expression I use all the time. If you don't ask, you don't get. It's basically really simple. I apply that to pretty much all my roles in life. Because the worst thing can happen is to say no, in which case you're in the exact same place you were already in. So if you don't ask, you don't get. So I started and ran a greening libraries initiative at Queen's Library. That was actually something I went to the Queen's Library and I said, I have this idea. I know a potential grant. I think libraries are a place where people can learn about and engage in green behavior. Because libraries are all about reuse, right? We're reusing our books over and over, our DVDs back then. And so I thought they are inherently green organizations. And I ran this program, I ran 1,500 programs a year in 6 different languages at the Greening Libraries Initiative in Queens. One of the most successful programs was a food waste drop-off. Now in New York City, people don't have yards. They're in apartments. They really don't have the ability to compost at home. So it was a very successful program. I moved back here to New Orleans. I lived here in the 90s. I moved away. After Katrina, I moved back. I bought a home. I was composting in my backyard. I'm a certified master composter. I'm a very lazy composter, but I was composting, but I realized that there just weren't any options in the city. And I thought, I know how to do this. I do this in Queens. So I went to the New Orleans Library and I talked to the director and I said, hey, any chance you'll let me have people bring their rotting food waste to the library so we can compost it? And yeah, you know, a couple of chuckles. And how does it work? Fortunately, I had done something similar. People love that there's precedence. They also love to be the first. So it's this interesting balance when you have a new idea. If you can say it's been done before, it helps allay their concerns. But if you can also say no one's doing it here in New Orleans, then it's like, ooh, we're pioneers. So I kind of had the best of both worlds in my pitch to them. And I was very lucky. The then executive director was like, sure, let's give it a try. So we started at 2 sites, an uptown site at Broadmoor Library and a downtown site at Alvar Library in the Bywater. Next slide. And basically running this little program, we've collected nearly 1 million pounds of food scraps from local residents, kind of like 5 pounds at a time, right? People come and they bring their scraps. Before COVID hit, the Rosa Keller Library in Broadmoor, we were collecting 1,200 pounds of food scraps in an hour and a half. So that hour and a half that you guys have for your collection coming up next week, because I met with Ellie back in January to talk about it. I mean, I don't know that you're gonna get 1,200 pounds. You know, it takes time for a program to grow. You might get 100, 200, you know, but every little bit, it all adds up. I say that all the time. So before COVID hit, we were at 10 different library locations, plus Tulane Law School. We were working with the Environmental Law Clinic. Next slide. So how it works, we heard about it a little bit. I'll just go over it briefly. Freeze it, bring it, dump it, go. So people bring their frozen fruit and vegetable scraps, their eggshells, nutshells, seed shells, tea bags, coffee grounds, plain grains, plain pasta, plain bread. We ask that you bring it in a reusable container or like a paper bag. Paper bag, after you dump the bag, you can tear it into pieces and put it into the bin. Reusable container, you take it home, you rinse it, you reuse it. Almost everyone has some sort of reusable container at home. It might be that you have a loose leaf lettuce thing that you got. It might be a big coffee cup, it might be a big yogurt cup. It's really interesting sometimes to see the different things that people bring their food scraps in. And yes, we have bins for you to bring your scraps in. When I started, I just got these little 13-gallon bins at the local 99-cent store, you know, and then by the time we were done, we were using 48-gallon bins. 48-gallon bins are over 200 pounds each one. So at that Rosa Keller Library, we had 6 of those 48-gallon bins. We had to hire someone with a pickup truck and a hauler and 2 people to lift the bins. So as your program grows, these are things we'll talk about, as your program grows, you have to plan and build for growth. It's not gonna all happen overnight, but you do need to think about that in your planning. Next slide. So, you know, I had some pictures. When we had a call prior to this, they were saying, I don't know if you're gonna have a lot of pictures of food waste. I was like, absolutely, I will. They're really beautiful, they're colorful. So I threw in some pictures of food scraps, and I mentioned that even dogs like it because when people are dropping off their food scraps, a lot of times our locations are all over the city. We encourage people to come walk, to bike, to take the bus. That's how I get everywhere. We wanted to decentralize our food waste drop-offs to decrease food waste miles. we've heard a lot in the kind of the food world about food miles, like why are we buying stuff, say from New Zealand? You buy something that's in season here in New Orleans. So even with food waste miles, I didn't want people getting in their car and driving 25 miles to drop off 5 pounds of food scraps, and then getting in their car and driving 25 miles home. So most of our locations, while we work with the libraries, is that libraries are in all the different communities. And we were at a point where nearly 50% of people were walking or biking, or taking mass transit, and some people were driving, but then they were also going inside the library. And so it was a double trip. We tried really hard to reduce the impact of this program. And yes, people walking their dogs was a very popular one. And so next slide. And there you go, and it's fun. We also had a lot of kids involved, which is great because we're teaching them early on. Lissie's got a child, she'll talk about that a little bit later. But people are always smiling, right? They're doing a good thing. They're keeping food waste out of the landfill. They're not getting anything out of it. They aren't getting compost out of it. They are just doing the right thing for a better world. Mostly they're doing it because they were aware of how important composting is, but they didn't want to actually compost at home. They didn't want to have a compost pile. They didn't want to turn the pile. They didn't want to have to add the browns and the leaves and turn it and aerate it. They didn't want to have to do the work. So the program that we offer is kind of like for those people who are aware how important it is to compost their food scraps, but don't necessarily want to get their hands dirty. Next slide. All right, so my green journey, because this focus was on entrepreneurship, so I just kind of put in a bunch of different green things I've done over the years. So I started out in high school with the Students for Environmental Quality. What we mostly did was litter pickups. Didn't really feel like it had a huge environmental impact, but that was what we did. We went on highways and we picked up litter. It's great. This group can keep Louisiana beautiful and keep America beautiful. That's their focus. By the time I got to college, I started taking environmental studies classes. This is like 30 years ago. They were doom and gloom. Like I got so depressed from these environmental studies classes 30 years ago that I actually stopped taking environmental studies classes because I thought, what can I do as an individual? Well, we already saw as an individual, I can make sure 1 million pounds of food scraps get out of the landfill. Like every one of us can make an impact. But my classes, at least, hopefully yours are different, they depressed the hell out of me and I thought there's nothing I can do. So I didn't take any more classes. But after I graduated with a degree in government, and I realized I hate the two parties. And I was like, well, there you go. I have a degree that in government, and I hate the two parties. I discovered something called the Green Party, which does exist here in the United States, but it also exists all over the world. And I got very active in green politics. In fact, I went on to work for the New Zealand Green members of Parliament in Parliament, and I continue to work to this day with Green Party members in Parliament in Canada, in New Zealand, and Australia. I then got very active in my community garden in Queens. And that was where I really got into composting because we had a compost pile in our community garden and it always smelled and it had rats and it was a mess. And I thought, how hard can this really be? So I took a master composter course at the Queens Botanical Garden and I learned it's not that hard. Composting requires 4 things: greens, browns, air, and water. Greens are nitrogen sources like food waste. Browns are carbon sources like leaves or wood chips or even shredded cardboard. Air, you know what air is, and water. Water is just to give it a little bit of moisture. You don't want it too wet, it needs to be like a damp sponge. If your compost pile is too wet, add more browns. If your compost pile is smelling, add more browns. If your compost pile is having like various insects laying their eggs, add more browns. The answer is almost always add more browns. So greens, browns, air, and water. Pretty straightforward. The air is for aerating it, so like aerobic activity. We're talking about aerobic composting. You're adding air to the pile so that when it breaks down, it doesn't release methane. Because when you send your food scraps to the landfill, they get smothered. They get smothered with plastic. They get smothered with tires. They get smothered with more plastic. They get smothered with grocery bags. They get smothered with even more plastic. And what happens, they don't get air. And they decompose and they produce methane. And methane is a greenhouse gas 84 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in the short term. Landfills and food waste in landfills are a huge problem and are contributing to greenhouse gases in the environment. And depending on where you stand, that is contributing to climate change. So don't go back. So I did a lot of that. And then I got to the Green Libraries Initiative, talked about it already, Compost Now. And then a few years ago, I was talking to folks at Jazz Fest, and they mentioned they were wanting to do a sustainability initiative, and they were thinking about hiring someone, and they asked if I would apply. I did, And then after that, I switched over to the French Quarter Festival. And I'll touch upon both of those positions a little later in the presentation. So, since it's a class on, or a talk that includes entrepreneurship, and I already mentioned my big slogan, if you don't ask, you don't get. My other big slogan is never wonder what if. It's kind of my guiding principle. One of the reasons I have this job history that takes me all over the place is that if someone offers me a job that I think is cool, I do it. And even if it's not necessarily going to make me a lot of money, I do it because I know it's going to lead to opportunities, it's going to lead to contacts, and it's going to teach me something. I learn everything I do. I'm going to learn from this class. Lizzie's going to give a presentation. I'm going to be like, oh wow, I didn't think about it that way. So I love to say yes. So I don't want to ever wonder what if. I also believe you don't have to be perfect, you just have to start, right? And things will grow over time. I mentioned your food waste drop-off might start small, but then give it a couple of weeks, couple of months, next thing you know, you might be taking a ton of waste every week. It all adds up. So you learn from your mistakes, you find your partners, you make a plan, and that plan, you have to plan for success. You have to plan for the growth because change is inevitable. Now, if you're a founder or director like me, one of the things you also want to think about is like a succession plan. What will happen when you do like I do and you spend 6 months out of the year traveling and working in other countries? You have to recognize that no one is indispensable. You have to build that into your plan. And it sounds funny, but there's this thing called like founderitis. A lot of organizations have founders who then it grows and it changes, and maybe it's time for them to step down or move to the side to allow more growth. Like unless there's that vacuum, sometimes people don't rise to meet that challenge. And so for me, very specifically, even with Compost Now, it's morphed over the years, and I've done that very purposefully because I know I can't always be there. It can't just be about me. It needs to be about my partners and also my staff volunteers that I leave behind. Next slide, please. So it's all about your partners. So over the years, these are some of the partners that I've worked with. A lot of times it's various community gardens. It might be some urban farms. I've worked with compost vendors, Schmelly's Dirt Farm, Real Cycle. I've worked with City Park. I've worked with Audubon Park. I've worked with Tulane, and now, thanks to Ellie and Jackie, we're going to be working with Loyola. Now, right now, I mostly just promote other people's food waste drop-offs, and I mostly just kind of talk it through them, help them start their own project. In the early days, I hosted every drop-off. I did all the work, but I travel. I can't do that anymore. So that's why now we're more of a network, promoting and encouraging others so that, from my perspective, they do all the work. It's great. Thank you. But yeah, so partnering is very important. Next slide. So again, now I'm putting Loyola. So we already heard about it. I had mentioned that baked goods, I think you probably will be able to take them, but they're going to check with their compost hauler just to make sure. On the flyer, it mentioned in a paper bag, but as mentioned, you can bring it in a reusable container. If you do decide to take your grocery bag, you're giving it a second use, you would just empty it and then take that away. What you don't want to do is put any of that in the bin. All right, next slide. So, how do you make money in composting? Well, I don't. Really. I make money from the opportunities that have come from running Compost Now. Now, vendors who basically are paid to haul away hundreds and thousands of pounds of food waste from the Superdome, from the convention center, from various restaurants and coffee shops, they make their money primarily from the hauling and the carting. They mostly then create compost, this end product, which is a soil amendment that people love to put in their garden to grow healthy fruit and vegetables, but they don't really make a lot of money from selling compost because I mentioned greens, browns, air, and water. Well, air and water is free, but browns, actually, you have to get a lot of browns, and usually you have more browns than greens, and then you have to do all the work. So selling compost as a product is not necessarily in and of itself a huge moneymaker. So they make their money from the hauling. They might also sell tools and soils and other supplies, but very rarely will you have someone who's making a great living just by selling compost. Some people will consult. They'll start a business where people will ask them to come to their home and design their composting system. There's lots of different ways you can compost at home. People will teach composting. They'll give talks, podcasts, writing. Next slide. For example, I wrote a chapter in this book. A librarian wanted to write a book about various greening programs that are happening in libraries. And so she wrote a book, 25 ready to use programs for libraries. I didn't make a lot of money off it, but created opportunities, created networks, and now I'm a published author. So hey, that's all good. There you go. See, and how to start a food waste collection program. Compost saves the world. This from garbage to garden. And it was basically a how-to. And now librarians from all over the country email me, ask me for advice and suggestions on how they can start a food waste collection program at their library in their own town. Next slide. So I'm a big believer in turning your passion into profit, or not. You know, sometimes it won't work out. That's part of your planning process. Can I monetize this process? Do I even want to monetize it? Sometimes you want to keep your passion your passion. I really have decided that I want to keep composting my passion as opposed to my day-to-day paycheck, because then it might not be as fun. Because look how much fun I'm having. I'm on a pile of steaming mulch in the middle of winter in New York City. We were collecting Christmas trees like they do here in New Orleans. We were collecting Christmas trees to turn into mulch, but someone had left a garland around their tree, so that I made it my scarf. So do what you love what you do. What goes around comes around. You know, these are expressions we hear a lot. I do tend to live my life by them. But the big thing I want to talk about was focusing on impact and leveraging opportunities. Next slide. Okay, so I already mentioned I got hired as Jazz Fest Sustainability Coordinator. It was solely because they wanted Compost Now to table at Jazz Fest. But in that process, they asked for recommendations for other tablers. I gave them a host of recommendations. They realized that I was this sort of like font of knowledge about stuff happening. And that's when they said, oh, we're looking to hire someone. Do you want to apply? I applied. There you go. Next slide. In 2023, I switched over. This is because of my focus on impact. French Quarter Festival has public composting. They require all of their food and beverage vendors to serve their food in compostable cups and bowls and plates, use compostable forks and spoons and knives. So as a festival patron, you can just dump everything into a compost bin. We weren't doing that at Jazz Fest. I was able to get a pilot project. It was going to take a really long time. And Jazz Fest only gets 450,000 people, whereas French Quarter Festival gets 875,000 people, almost a double. And it's a local festival, local people. So we're helping the people in Louisiana who often don't have composting opportunities anywhere in their life. We're introducing that to them. So for me, I liked that as a greater impact. So that's why I decided to do that. And then back to our partner issue is that the food and beverage vendors are active partners in this. They have to purchase these materials for our festival, and some of them have gone to then use them in their brick and mortar restaurants or their catering business because they're like, oh, this actually worked, and you know, we have some leftovers, so we might as well use them. So on that, we do need volunteers. Our initiative at French Quarter Festival is called Going Green. It's Louisiana, so going is G-A-U-X, Going Green. We have 3 bins. There's always a landfill bin, which is black, a green bin, which is compost, and a blue bin, which is recycling. And we have volunteers either stationed at a bin to kind of tell people, help them what to do. Or if they put something in the wrong bin, we have like those little trash pickers where you can just move items. And so if you just go to FQFI, French Quarter Festival Inc.org/volunteer, there's a sign-up sheet. We would love to have you. It's Thursday, April 11th to Sunday, April 14th. And hopefully some of you will join us. You'll see me, you'll get a t-shirt. You'll get $10 in beverage and merchandise tickets. And hopefully you'll have as much fun as some of those other people were having earlier. And then if you want to know more about composting, I have another 6 slides, but I'm pretty much out of time, so we'll skip that one. But I don't know if the organizers share presentations, so I stuck the slides in there in case anyone wanted a copy of the presentation. They wanted a deep dive into composting. they could do that. All right, thank you very much.
Hold off questions to Lynn until the end. So our next speaker is Lissie Stewart. She is the founder and executive director of NOLA Artist Incubator, a nonprofit focused on arts, education, and sustainability. Lissie has 10 years classroom teaching experience, a master's degree in educational leadership, and is a certified Louisiana master gardener and permaculture designer. She advocates for the arts and the environment through running the Incubator and Galvez Garden, a community garden in St. Rose. So I'm going to pull up your slide.
You want me to advance your part?
Okay. Hi guys, how are y'all doing? So I'm Lissie Stewart, the Executive Director of the NOLA Artist Incubator, and gonna jump right in. The mission of our organization is providing education, community outreach, and an artist and residence program. We are committed to building a creative network of makers for a more sustainable environment. We believe in the power of art to transform spaces. You know, and it actually could probably help me if you would.
Okay, sure, yeah.
So they asked me to come today, they asked us to come to tell our story. So our story kind of, it all goes back to starting with an idea, a dream, a goal. And for me, that all came from the Galvez Garden. When the nonprofit was built, everything came from that. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about our garden and how it evolved. We sort of were guided by the principle of trying to figure out how does the dream idea tie to the need for our community. And before I get into this, being totally real, this is 100% my organization, my endeavor, made possible with the support of my loving husband. There's my little one, so you're gonna see a lot of pictures of cute redhead, that's mine. Next slide. All right, the incubator. So if I'm gonna be starting my own organization, making a nonprofit, what's it gonna be about? In my previous life, I was a teacher, I'm an artist, so I taught at NFR for 10 years and I had my baby. And decided to be a stay-at-home mom, and then 2020 hit, where everyone's life changed. My pandemic obsession was the garden. And then one day, actually, somebody was telling me dropping off compost. I love it all coming back to compost. And they said, "Are you a nonprofit?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Why not?" And I didn't have an answer. So I thought, if I'm gonna start a nonprofit, I want to make sure that I do what I love, because if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. So the incubator is rooted in art, education, and sustainability. As such, the aim of the nonprofit is working with cultivators and youth to grow gardens, green spaces, and environmentally focused public art that give back to the community. And this is an example of me doing that. Ways we support cultivators. I was able to hire a Mardi Gras Indian, a brass band, and an acoustic band to celebrate our art education sustainability day at the garden. We had a second line, it was a great time. Next slide. All right, so to make it make sense, these are my focus areas. They're on arts, education, community outreach, and public art program. Galvez Garden is kind of our hub, our nest, if you will. We practice sustainable urban agriculture, offer free composting service, and grow food for community members. Budding Artists is our educational program in which we teach 2 to 5-year-olds and their caregivers. And all the art projects we make are made using sustainable practices. So painting tin cans and planting plants in it. Our artist in residency and public art programs are another way where we participate in neighborhood beautification projects and or employing like local culture bearers to create environmentally focused art. Next slide. All right, so this is our garden, the Galvez Garden. Here's the before picture. Sweet Roch, I know. It was just an empty lot. It's New Orleans Redevelopment Authority property, so owned by the city, part of the Growing Green project. We came up with a proposal saying what we wanted to do, went through the process, got approved, and this is what we started in. We knew we wanted to be rooted in sustainable urban agriculture. Since evolving, we are now Louisiana Master Gardener approved project site and a USDA recognized pupils garden. Next slide. Are you ready? Yeah. I 100% have to say, this is the Galvez Garden after receiving $10,000 from the USDA. Through the Galvez Garden, NOLA Artist Incubator is able to offer educational programs to the community focused on creating sustainable art, urban vegetable gardening, and backyard composting. We were one of 6 gardens throughout Louisiana and South Carolina to receive a Cultivating the Community Garden grant award. And I joke about it. I made the list of everything I could possibly dream of. This is everything we need, the best garden I ever could have imagined. And then they called me up, they said, congratulations, you've got it, but you only asked for $5,000, it's for 10. So I looked at my husband and said, what are we gonna do? He said, double it. So you're looking at about $7,000 worth of infrastructure that was purchased with the intention, and the goal of it lasting, another 35 years. Next slide. So the goals of our garden, we started initially just to fight blight and create a safe space for the community. This is I can say because I live there, the dodgier part of St. Roch community. It was a hub of very bad activity, and we have since then transformed it into something different. We wanted to intentionally leave half of the space open to be a green space for community members. The best compliment I ever got was from a neighbor that said it's like our little slice of City Park. So people really do actually use it. I really like it to watch people walk through the garden rather than just around it. We are creating biodiversity. We wanted to serve as a demonstration teaching gardens, grow native plants, offer that free weekly compost collection, workshops for families in the community. And all the while, it's been very intentional. We're creating biodiversity and serving as a stormwater mitigation site. Next slide. So this is sort of a look at the evolution over the years where we started. You do the nice little pallet fence. You go living in a garden with pallets. It's really, really fun. It's not gonna last a year. The termites gonna it's gonna get rotted. We're so grateful for our beds. And here is after the grant from the USDA, we have a nice little farm stand. I have both these pictures up because even when we had nothing, we were able to demonstrate that you could grow food. You could become urban gardeners, urban farmers, we could grow food that people could eat. And at that time, I was taking all the help I could get. And somebody gave me, a farmer friend of mine, gave me a whole bunch of lettuce starts. They all went really well, which is great, but all of a sudden I had a bunch of lettuce that was gonna be right at the same time and no way of giving it to people. So one of our partnerships we made was with Food Rescue. They're nationwide, they're a local chapter, and I was able to set up a time saying, sometime next week, I got a harvest, when are you available? So I could meet up with them, and that was a bunch of people that needed it that day. Now that we have our new system, we just succession plant and try and weekly, if we can, put it on the farm stand, and it was great. It is gone by the end of the day. And we learn about our neighbors, like apparently nobody likes kale where I live, but like I could never grow enough water. Next slide. So I got somebody come every single day asking about watermelon, because we watermelon in the grocery store, and they think they love watermelon, keep me up. Composting here, our beautiful composting pictures. My little one actually did get really, really into it. She would be really into the eggs and the funny aside, when she like had very little words. We were having breakfast and my husband gave her a banana and she saw the banana peel and said, compost. And I thought, we are teaching her well. So in here, these are actually in-ground worm bins. So we get the compost collected like that. And then I go through it and find the things that I know won't harm worms. So like citrus is a no-no. I'll usually find banana peels, an apple core, some bread or something, and you put like a layer of it, layer of browns on top of it. And I have my in-bed fertilizers, just helping fertilize that soil for me. I'm proud of our partnership with Compost NOW. That was one of the first people I reached out to, and it was a wonderful partnership. I'm excited to hear that your school is doing that. Over the last 2 years that we've been working with them, we have composted over 10,000 pounds of food waste diverted from our landfills. So I'm really proud of that. And then just here's another example of the creating the green space. So half of the garden is for growing, half of the garden is to be open up. And it really is a natural space that we can activate in the community that there wasn't there before. Next slide. I could talk forever and ever about that. That's all I'm gonna say about the garden. I know we're here talking a little bit about entrepreneurship. So you'll notice I said free. As a business model, you're like, what business model is this? This is a nonprofit with no revenue stream. All of our programming is free. How do we make it work? We make it work because all of our funds are donated or grant backed. I can be totally real with you. Our donations, I think last year we made like $1,000. All of our money comes from grants. So in order to make my nonprofit successful, I needed to learn how to hustle, how to beg, how to write and find grants, how to manage them, keeping your records is a must, how to keep my funders happy, and how to report on them. But because we offer all of our services for free, we're appealing to funders. So doing good really does pay off. This is an example of another grant. It was crazy. We got the $10,000 from the USDA, and then like a month before that, we got $10,000 from LA Percent for the Art to do the other arm of our organization in supporting artists. Somehow we managed it. But they offered me $10,000 to make a public art project. It turns out that's not a lot of money to make like a sculpture or a mural. And because of the deadlines, the last thing I would want to do, I was really concerned about not having enough community input. The last thing I want to do is create something that the public didn't like. So I decided to spread the wealth and give $1,000 to 10 artists each to go out to the Audubon in the east and paint pretty paintings of nature. And you'll see, I have this up, for example, because I have my funded by the Louisiana Office of Cultural Development, Louisiana Percent for the Arts, and the Appalachia National Heritage Area. Really, really important to always give credit to those people. But what's even more wonderful is not only do we get funding to produce this program, we now have them as partners. Next slide. Here's another example of a crazy grant I got. But again, I was talking about how it all started with a dream or an idea. So I came up with this idea that I wanted to make the Magic Mobile Art Cart, a whimsical traveling makerspace that went around and delivered the love of gardening and art on site to different people, fabricated from scratch. And wouldn't you believe it? Thank you, Entergy. We received the 2022 Arts and Culture Grant to build it. We've been at Jazz and Heritage Festival, Kids Smarts, Art Jam. We had our party at the Galvez Garden, and my daughter goes to NOLA Nature School, and when they were having the career day, I couldn't help myself, so I brought the artist incubator, Magical Mobile Art Cart up, and we got to make art there too. Can you turn the slide? Fully supported by Entergy. I will say another note on grant writing. I never really took a class on that for business. I was all an arts major, arts and movement studies. And I have learned a lot. In any grant you apply for, if they say it's not for salary, okay, it's not for salary. You should always put 10 to 12% in there to go back to you. So for this grant, for example, I wrote in an artist stipend because of all the work that went into the build. Well, look at how fun that was. The dream was to make this crazy card, basically a tiny house on wheels, and go to jazz sets and deliver art with kids. And it was like a landed on the moon when we were there. Everybody's happy, everybody loves it. We're deciding if it's worth my time to go back and do it again, because it was a lot. I like going to jazz sets and not working at jazz sets. But I didn't know until I did it. If I do it, it will be because it'll be fun. If I don't, I can say, I always say I did. And we have this card as a tremendous asset to use for years and years. Next slide. And then finally, the other arm of my nonprofit is goes back to my love of teaching. So I decided to make it budding artists. I know we embrace the funds, but it's an arts and literacy program for 2 to 5-year-olds and their caregivers. And what makes us different is art is a really wasteful craft. It's very easy. So let's say I had all the money in the world, be like, everybody gets this, blah, blah, blah. At the end of it, how much waste I produced, I was not okay with it. So after I decided I wasn't going back to teaching and knew I was going to stay at home mom thing, I did get my master's in education, and I had all that experience of writing curriculum. So I wanted to design this program that like hopefully creates future stewards of our planet, creates excitement about caring about the planet and sustainability, and to actually be sustainable in the process. So if you want to go to the next slide, this is just sort of the business part of it. 2023, I approached the library and facilitated 5 weeks, because that March there were 5 weeks of programming. I did that for free. They didn't know me. So I offered my services. I had $200 that I received in donations, and I made that stretch to get all of our supplies, being thoughtful. I was a cheap art teacher too, so I was very thoughtful with what we did. They loved it. Everybody loved it. So it was worth my time to do it for free, to introduce myself and demonstrate work. 2024, I negotiated pay from the library. The rate I set, $65 an hour, with $100 for art supplies. in hindsight, I probably would want to ask more for art supplies, but it's such a small amount they were giving me, I thought it seemed like too big, but now I set the precedent and I can't. Additionally, so I like, this is where the business part is, I want to have to do some math. Because I had those cute pictures of cute kids making art and making an impact, I was able to secure $3,000 from Jazz and Heritage Foundation, and $15,000 from the City of New Orleans Culture and Recreation Fund. Both of these grants happen annually with the opportunity to be renewed. Remember when I said it's really important to report and report. I'm really looking forward to giving them a good report because these grants I wrote directly for salary. So you can do the math. I did 5 sessions that were a half hour each. For free. Following year, I was able to acquire 340 for 4 days of a half hour class, the total being, that's just one of our programs. So it shows you can make things work with grant writing, you just have to be careful of how you write it, and we were fortunate that this $15,000 grant came up, because if not, it would have been $3,000 grant, which happens to be growing business. But by offering free services, we were able to secure funders, demonstrate that we're free material to be shared. And I bring this up because sometimes it's worth it. So with the culture grant, I have the option of going back to the library and asking, I know I've said that person, if you could give me a very small amount of money. Or I could say, I don't need that money. I would much rather work with a different organization and reach more people or expand my reach. Because the benefit would be having more higher numbers and making me look better in reporting back to my grant. So sometimes you have to take a step back before you can take 2 steps forward. But if you're strategic about it, it can really work in your favor. And then these are just pictures of my sweet kids. You can switch the slide. A lot of my time is actually spent creating material for like Instagram and getting familiar with Canva. You go to the next slide. But each one of these, like the picture I showed you, the magical mobile art card, that was actually submitted in a grant reporting follow-up. Each one of these I'll be giving to the city, saying thank you, look how happy everybody was. I spent a lot of time blogging. And I just wanted to leave you, you can go to the next slide. Some truth I learned, the smartest thing I ever did when I started the garden and especially the nonprofit was reaching out to people smarter than me. I reached out to Lynn, for example, and said, we want to offer composting. I tried to host my little compost drop-off site. That was a mess. So I said, how do you do it? And she got in touch, went through her social media, partnering with her, gave me access to all the people that had that mindset of wanting to compost. Then they just had a new location. And if I was closer than their previous location, I had people coming to me. And then people started in the neighborhood asking what was happening. And we have a really great following. When I started the garden, I reached out to Sprout and reached out. I was not a master gardener. I decided I need to learn more if I'm in charge of this. I went through LSU Ag's Master Gardener Training Program. I've got a permaculture design certification, which was actually really, really, really difficult. But it completely changed my mind about how to design the garden. I started it completely from scratch, and it's better because of it. So you don't have to know what you're doing all the time. If you think you do, you probably are doing something wrong. Being an organization focused on sustainability and doing good leads to meeting other people, organizations doing good in the community. My network of people I partner with are wonderful things, and it's just a beautiful world I live in. I spend time with good people every day. There's also a flip side of that, which kind of goes into my next point. Being flexible while maintaining organizational values is a must. Our organization is a Girl Scout. We do everything by the book. My files are perfect. We have a good reputation because all we do is spread goodwill. There might be a lure of partnering with somebody that's more popular or more shiny or has more donors, but I refuse to tarnish the values that we have, and I'm not going to associate with anybody that may have a hint of drama because I don't have to. When you're, building the ship while flying it, you get to make those decisions, you get to make those roles, but that's when I stand by. I gotta be flexible, knowing, I might not make a big salary this time, but we're gonna make a big impact this year. And steer the course based on your values. You don't need to reinvent the wheel to have an original business model. For me, I think about when I was just starting. So basically, I spent a year getting the garden together, and then a year trying to formulate the nonprofit, the organizational structure, getting together the boards, and then a year going and doing it, and now we're in year 2 of really busy doing the work. But when I was first starting, I kind of looked to organizations that had what I wanted, or were doing things that I thought were cool. I took what I want, I left the rest, put it all together, and something started to appear, and then I refined it. And I think we're really unique. There's a lot of organizations that do art with kids, a lot of organizations that do gardening, not a lot of organizations that have that overlap. And I don't know of any arts organizations that have their principles rooted in being sustainable. I'm really proud of that. Being persistent and patient is key. It takes time to build a meaningful program and organization. Rome wasn't built in a day, the garden wasn't built in a day, and you all might have never heard of our organization before today, but now you do. I'm so pleased with all the things that we've been able to do. I'm so pleased I took the chance of trying to create it. I'm so pleased in seeing what this thing I've created, how it's evolving into taking me to different places. If you can go to the next slide. I just wanted to give you guys my information. One of the things that we're doing, I know Lynn did a pin for volunteers. You guys don't need to volunteer for me. We're just gonna be having a party. Because when I write those grants now, I save a little space saying I want to hire culture bearers to celebrate our event. So we are putting in a welcome to St. Roch sign. I'm actually a job creator. And I got to hire these iron workers to make it for us. And we're gonna put a little garden in there. Trying to re-amp the neutral ground in a part of St. Roch. It's really pretty on one side, not really pretty on the other side. So I'm hoping this will be phase 1 of a phase 2 project. And when we get that in, we're gonna have a day to celebrate it with like a second line. And there's no drinking on my garden, but there can be drinking in the neutral ground. So I'd like to personally invite you. I have our handle on Instagram. If you just follow us, we're gonna have a second line natural art cart will be there, and art making, maybe artists making art. I'm debating if I want to do the cool acoustic or the loud brass band, but that's everything kind of cool. In closing, I get to wear overalls anytime I want, and yeah, I look forward to seeing all the projects you guys come up with. Thank you for having me.
Q&A session, so if anybody wants to ask a question.
Or not.
When starting out, you find that when you're reaching out to other organizations and people, did you find people more or less receptive to helping you than you had anticipated?
To me?
Either one.
Okay, when starting out, how people reacted, I was kind of a badger. So like I've been trying to get in touch with somebody from the botanical gardens for a year, that hasn't been successful. If it's like not working, I'm like, I've got other things to do. I kind of gravitate to if somebody gets excited about my project. I think if you're excited about things, people generally want to hear more. And then if they don't seem excited, I don't really want to talk more. I want partners to be on the same page, and I want things to be genuinely collaborative. I hope that answers the question.
And for me, I sort of touched upon this briefly. I've had success with the idea of like precedence, kind of a track record that Lissie was saying. She applies for grants, but she already has demonstrated in pictures and things like that. So I've mostly had successful interactions, but there are potential partners I reached out to. If I see a community garden, or I go to buy some plants and there's a collective somewhere and they're in a part of town, you don't have drop off, I might say, hey, do you guys compost? A lot of times they don't. And then I'd say, are you willing to compost? And sometimes it's happening, but I do sometimes reach out to organizations who are just like, we don't have the capacity. Because at a certain point, you know, the difference between collecting 100 or 200 pounds of food waste and collecting 1,200 pounds a week is a capacity issue. But overall, I think, at least for both of us, probably because of the nature of our projects, that we get pretty good reception. But it's important, you gotta ask. Remember, if you don't ask, you don't get it. Anyone else?
What tips like would you have, if any, to somebody who's like just starting out composting like at home?
So with composting, I mentioned greens, browns, air, and water. And that's for aerobic composting, which is what I recommend because we don't want to be producing methane. We want to have air and water. Typically, people are doing either something that's like out and open in the ground, or they're doing something in a vessel. So sometimes you see these things that are like they call tumblers. Oh, I forgot to put on. So okay. It's a tumbler which encloses it in vessel. And some people like to have their tumbler because since it's enclosed, they don't have to worry about rats, roaches, smells, etc. Tumblers you can make. You can find a barrel and make it yourself, or you can purchase it online. It can be a little pricey. I typically don't recommend tumblers just because what happens is they are off the ground and they are enclosed, which means that your worms and all your beneficial insects and the fungi like that, they're not getting into your system. So depending on where you are though, if you're in an apartment building or if you have neighbors or maybe worried, you might want to choose a system where it's enclosed. There's also these open systems which usually have, they can be made out of pallets, they can be made out of concrete, it can just be a hole, you can use a trash can. I mean, it kind of depends on what you want to do and how much work you want. So I think the big thing I always recommend to people is think, how much effort do I want to put in? My mom digs a hole in the ground and throws the scraps, puts some leaves on it, and that's it. Doesn't do anything else. Sometimes I do that. I dig a hole, I dig it 18 inches deep though. And then basically it's called trench composting. You dig a trench and all that soil that you dug out, when I put my traps in, I just push the soil back over and it kind of closes it. And then similar to the system that Lissie showed with the worms, is that the food is decomposing in the ground, it's adding the nutrients directly. In a tumbler system or in an outdoor sort of 3-bin system, you create this product, this compost, and then you have to add back into your soil. So the big question is, what are your goals? Do you want to actually produce compost? Do you just want to keep it out of the landfill? Do you want to have the product or not? Do you have concerns about attracting rodents, rats, roaches, etc.? Most of which in an outdoor system, again, more browns. The answer is almost always more browns. And that's really so hard to know because everyone's situation is different. But the big thing is the grounds. So when you're walking or driving or biking and you see a whole bunch of leaves on the ground, and there's a bunch of us, all we do is we sit there and we scoop them up and we take them home with us because you need grounds. The food waste is pretty easy, we all eat, but the grounds can be a little tricky.
I was just curious if you're gonna add anything about vermicomposting.
Oh yeah.
I would just say, don't be afraid. I was really afraid of worms, because I love all living creatures. And I'm like, what if we kill the worms? Like, what if we did it myself? And then I realized, like, just try it, it'll be okay. And now I'm like excited every spring. I'm like, I want to go around Jim's worm farm, get more worms. And you can actually, I feel like that's a thing people do in the city in small places. You're not worried about like what you're baking or something. Having a little bin, with enough, you're not worried about getting the compost here or whatever. You open up holes so they can breathe and like you can drain. And when in our backyard, rather than doing a compost, if we have room to do the compost, we had a worm bin. So for our little family, it was just really easy. So I wouldn't be afraid.
So with the Green Libraries Initiative in New York City, when we taught composting, we specifically taught people on vermicomposting, which is composting with worms, and we created worm bins for people. And so a worm bin was basically, so it was just basically a bin, usually like a 10-gallon, but again, you can get it like a Dollar General or a Family Dollar, and you put in a layer of your browns, and then like usually some pre-existing compost. Then you get your worms. I get them locally from Laughing Food and Nursery. I don't get them shipped from Jim's farm. I know a lot of people do. No. And then you start feeding your worms, and then you cover them with shredded newspaper. Worms are used to living, under the dirt, so they need kind of something on top of them. It's called a bedding. And also, if you don't give them enough scraps, they can always eat bigger quicker. So I have a worm bin, I love my worm bin. Hundreds of people in New York City have worm bins because they went to the library program. We also then have these worm towers, which were very similar to what Lissie did in her garden, but we didn't get a grant, so we basically went to Lowe's, bought a bunch of 6-inch PVC pipe, and we drilled a bunch of holes. And so the stuff, the holes goes below ground, and stuff without the holes above ground, so with a chute, you throw your food in there. The worms come, they eat, and then they leave because they go through the holes. And as they leave, they poop. The vermicompost is actually worm poop, and they are spreading that nutrient-rich vermicompost throughout the soil. So yeah, worm bins are great. I love my worms. And unfortunately, I've killed a lot of worms. But I will say, they have an expression about like multiplying like rabbits, I guess like supposedly bunnies, but worms multiply like crazy. You get a pound of worms, within 6 months, you're gonna have multiple pounds of worms, and you can give it to your friends, so they can start their own worm bin. Okay,
What about like rats and raccoons and? things like that?
So your worm bin, typically I keep my worm bin inside. I keep it usually either in my kitchen or my bathroom. I usually just keep it in under my kitchen sink. And it's enclosed. So similar to the tumbler system, when it's enclosed, you don't really have to worry about rats and roaches and anything like that because it's enclosed. When you're outside, there's a couple ways you do it. If you have a sort of more open bin, you can put a lid on it. In New York City, one of the things we do is we put like chicken wire, you know, that kind of like chain link thing on the bottom so that they won't come in, because when the ground freezes, a lot of times the rats will try to burrow underneath, but I haven't had an issue with that here at all. So for the most part, put the grounds on top of it, keeps the smells down. The other thing is we're not typically at home composting meat and bones, which are things that scavengers would like. So if you are putting just in your fruit and vegetable scraps and stuff like that, and you're covering your browns, it really isn't that much of an issue. I saw 3 other hands though, so there was someone, 1 or 2 people over here. Was that, it's you? Okay.
Yeah, so I see what you just answered. So the second one, how often would you recommend aerating your backyard compost bin? Because my worm bin, I never aerate it. I leave them alone. They live in my garage. But my backyard compost bin, when would you recommend me aerating that?
So your worm bin that you have, it has holes in it, right?
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's the aeration, and so they can breathe through that way. But they're creating the aeration because worms are wiggling through the scraps. They're effectively turning the compost itself. That's why you don't have to do it. For your backyard system, it's entirely up to you. It goes back to your goals. If you're like, oh, I want to start my garden, I need a cubic yard of compost in 3 months, then you're gonna probably want to turn it at least once a week. If you don't really care that much about your output, compost happens. It's a natural process. What we're basically doing is trying to manage a natural process to either speed up the decomposition process, to try to keep at bay, rats or roaches, but it's a natural process. It's really up to you. Once a week is fine. All right, there was a hand over here, I thought, yes.
About Compost Now, where, like, in terms of growth, is it going right now? And like, where do you want to see it end up? Because I guess I'm imagining like now it's on like a city or like maybe even a little past that level, but is there a potential for it to be like a national thing? And if it's not Compost Now, could it be some other thing, I guess?
That's a great question. So when I started, I actually started solely because the city didn't have anything and I knew I could do it. But I only thought I would do it for a year or 2. This is now my 8th year. And that's because the city did not in fact step up. The city kept promising me it would step up. I would meet with the Department of Sanitation. And then finally they have a recycling center in Elysian Fields, which at the time was open 1 Saturday a month. And they started offering a food scrap drop off once a month. And then me and my volunteers were doing 50 a month and the city was doing 1 a month. Then they moved to 2 a month, and then I hit, and then they don't even have that at all. So I started with the idea that I wanted to do like a proof of concept. I wanted to say to the city, okay, maybe you're not gonna have municipal curbside where everyone's gonna have their garbage bin, their recycling bin, and their composting bin, but a decentralized drop-off model works. They use it in cities around the world. Proof of concept. The problem is I was too successful. I started meeting with the Department of Sanitation. They're like, oh, well, you do it, we don't have to. That said, last year, a group of us, Sprout and some others, we applied with the city for a grant, and we're waiting to hear. And the grant is to develop a network of community composting drop-off sites. So it's gonna basically be doing what I've already done, that's fine, because now if the city gets invested in it, it's a way forward. So that's sort of organizationally where I always wanted to go, is I wanted the city to take things over, but I always wanted there to be this network of community composting efforts. Because when a municipality takes over and the capacity is such that it's now thousands and hundreds of thousands and millions of pounds of food waste, often that means that just like a landfill, they have to find space to compost it. And that usually becomes beyond the capacity of a local farm. But a local farm is keeping local resources in the local community. And that local garden and farm is then using that compost in their local farm to grow healthy, nutritious, like pest-resistant plants. And so there's always a role for community composting. So for me, I always wanted to make sure we move both of those forward. Personally, I travel a lot. I'm usually in New Orleans at this point, January, February, March, and I leave town by the end of April. I don't come back again until around Christmas. So the transition with Compost Now was a network as opposed to it used to be at the libraries. Myself or a volunteer would host every one of those sites. I was paying for haulers to come in and I had to fundraise. I had to get out of that. I'm not here enough to do it. The model I'm doing is happening all over the country. Lots of people are doing it. And some people are doing cool things. They're hauling or picking up the food waste in like a pedicab, a bike-powered composting system. There's an organization called BK Rot in Brooklyn where they hire kind of disadvantaged youth, who are then hired to bike the compost and then they take it to be composted and they're learning all these skills and then actually they sell the compost at farmers markets. So they're learning merchandising and selling as well as learning how to garden as well as good exercise. So the possibilities are endless, especially here in Louisiana because we're really starting at ground zero. The possibilities of trying to build something are endless. It doesn't have to be Compost Now. I don't really want it to be Compost Now. I really wanted it to be done in 2 years. I didn't want to be referred to as the Compost Queen of New Orleans, which I have been referred to on local radio and TV shows. It wasn't what I set out my life to do. Happy and proud to wear that badge, but for me, the goal was to get other people doing it because it's so important, and I can only do so much.
And then I kind of had a question off of that. Is there anything specifically that works in tandem with composting? Like since composting gives you potentially like fertilizer, better soil, like is there another sustainable practice like with them growing the stuff afterwards or?
So actually I'm gonna slightly different. So one of the things that compost does is you add it to your soil. So compost is a soil amendment. You don't plant directly in your compost. It's actually too nutrient rich. You can actually like kind of burn your roots. So you're adding it to your soil. When you add it to your soil, it makes the soil retain water better. So if any of you have ever had like a potted plant and you've forgotten to water it, and then you water it, and the water just kind of like goes right through it, and you're like, whoops, I just made a mess. That's because it's dried out. Soil that's been amended in compost retains water better. So then it becomes a stormwater management technique. So when you're doing stormwater management, and you're trying to improve your drainage and you're trying to, one thing you can do is to add compost to that soil. This is going to retain the water better. So that's another environmental benefit that doesn't get talked about a lot. I talk to stormwater management groups all the time about it, and they're all like, yes, yes, yes. And then unfortunately, it's not something that a lot of funders want to fund. So that, and then, but growing, it does really make a difference. So it's, if you think you eat a banana, you want that potassium, you put the banana in the ground, that potassium is now in the ground, right? We need these foods for all these different vitamins and nutrients that we're giving to our soil. So the soil that's been amended with compost is more pest resistant. It generally is going to grow healthier and healthier food. It's going to be good for little kids, budding artists to eat, things like that. But definitely the stormwater management side is something I think gets neglected a lot.
Okay, I think we do need to wrap it up, but if you have more questions, you can come and meet our speakers. Thank you. Our next roundtable is during Earth Week, so the Thursday of Earth Week. We're doing one on spirituality and art.
They meant, that's, yeah.